Picture this. Your players walk into another tavern, meet another innkeeper, and buy another room for the night. The fighter yawns, the wizard checks their phone, your carefully crafted settlement feels like every other dot on the map they've visited before. Sound familiar? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most game masters create towns that are forgettable wallpaper, not living, breathing places that stick in your players' minds long after the session ends. But what if I told you that with just a few simple shifts in how you approach settlement design, you could transform every village, town, and city into something your players will remember for years? What if each location could feel so distinct, so alive, that your players would genuinely get excited just hearing its name mentioned again? I'm about to reveal a system that will revolutionize how you create settlements in your campaigns. This isn't just about adding more details or drawing prettier maps. This is about understanding the fundamental elements that make places feel real, memorable, and worth caring about. By the end of this series, you'll have a toolkit that turns every settlement into a character in its own right. Here's what we're going to cover: the 5 pillars that separate forgettable locations from unforgettable ones, the secret ingredient that breathes life into any settlement, regardless of size, and the one mistake that even experienced dungeon masters make that kills immersion instantly. Plus, I'll walk you through real examples from actual campaigns where these techniques turned throwaway stops into player favorites. But before we dive deep, let me share something that changed everything for me as a game master. After running games for over a decade, I thought I understood world building. My towns had shops, NPCs, and plot hooks. They functioned perfectly fine, but fine isn't memorable. Fine doesn't make players lean forward in their chairs or get genuinely excited about returning to a place they've been before. Then I discovered something that professional writers have known for generations. Places aren't just backdrops, they're characters. They have personalities, quirks, secrets, and stories. Once you start treating your settlements like characters instead of just locations, everything changes. The truth is, creating memorable towns isn't about having the biggest budget or the most detailed maps. It's about understanding what makes a place feel alive. And that starts with recognizing that every settlement, no matter how small, has a soul. Think about the places in your own life that matter to you: the coffee shop where you feel at home, the park where you go to think, the neighborhood that just feels different from everywhere else. What makes these places special isn't their size or their amenities, it's their character. It's the way they make you feel. It's the stories they hold. Your fictional settlements need that same depth. They need to feel like places that existed before your players arrived and will continue existing long after they leave. They need histories that shaped them, conflicts that define them, and secrets that make them worth exploring. Most game masters approach town creation backwards. They start with the practical stuff. Where's the blacksmith? Where's the inn? Where can players buy supplies? But that's like describing a person by listing their job, their address, and their shopping habits. Technically accurate, but completely missing what makes them interesting. Instead, we're going to start with the soul of the place. What happened here that changed everything? What do the locals whisper about when strangers aren't listening? What tradition do they follow that would seem strange to outsiders? What are they proud of? What are they ashamed of? What are they afraid of? Every memorable settlement has what I call a defining tension. It's the thing that creates drama, drives conflict, and gives the place its unique flavor. Maybe it's a town built on a lie that everyone pretends to believe. Maybe it's a community torn between tradition and progress. Maybe it's a place where two cultures collide and create something entirely new. This tension doesn't have to be world ending or campaign defining. It just needs to be real and human. The most compelling settlements are the ones dealing with problems that feel genuine, even in a fantasy world. Here's where most guides get it wrong. They focus on the external details first: the architecture, the layout, the demographics. But memorable places are built from the inside out. You need to understand who these people are and what they care about before you can know how they'd build their homes or organize their streets. Let me give you an example. I once created a fishing village that was completely unremarkable on paper. Small population, simple economy, no major landmarks. But I gave it one defining characteristic. The entire town was built on stilts above a tidal marsh, and twice a day the tide would come in and flood the lower level of every building. This single detail changed everything. It affected how people moved through the town, how they built their homes, how they planned their days. It created a natural rhythm that made the place feel alive. More importantly, it raised questions. Why build here? What are they hiding beneath the water? What happens to the town when the tide comes in? That's the power of starting with character instead of checklist. One strong, unique element can transform an entire settlement and give you dozens of story hooks without even trying. But character alone isn't enough. Your settlements also need what I call lived in details. These are the small touches that make a place feel real rather than constructed. The worn stones in front of the most popular tavern, the way people nod to each other on certain streets but not others. The fact that everyone knows to avoid the baker on Thursdays because that's when he's hungover. These details can't be random, though. They need to flow naturally from the character and history of the place. Every lived in detail should tell a story or hint at a larger truth about the settlement. The most effective way to create these details is to ask yourself, what would daily life actually look like here? How do people get their water? Where do they dispose of waste? What time do they wake up and why? What do children do for fun? What do adults do for gossip? When you start thinking about the mundane realities of life in your settlements, you'll discover countless opportunities to add character and create story hooks. The well that's been running dry, the neighborhood where the street lamps always burn out, the market stall that's been empty for months because no one talks about what happened to the previous owner. These aren't just flavor text. These are the threads your players will pull on, the mysteries they'll want to solve, the details that will make them feel like they're exploring a real place with real people and real problems. Remember, your players don't need to know every detail you create. In fact, they shouldn't. The goal isn't to overwhelm them with information. It's to create a foundation solid enough that you can respond naturally to whatever they're curious about. When a player asks an unexpected question about your settlement, you want to be able to answer it in a way that feels consistent with everything else they've learned. That's only possible if you've done the work to understand the place deeply enough that you can improvise details that fit. Think of it like method acting, but for locations. You need to get into character as the settlement itself. What would this place want? What would it fear? How would it react to strangers? What would it try to hide or show off? This might sound abstract, but it becomes surprisingly practical once you start doing it. When you truly understand a settlement's character, every decision becomes easier. You know instinctively how the locals would react to different situations, what kind of shops would thrive here, what problems would arise naturally from the town's unique circumstances. The best part about this approach is that it's scalable. Whether you're creating a hamlet with 12 residents or a metropolis with hundreds of thousands, the same principles apply. Size changes the complexity, but not the fundamental need for character, tension, and lived in details. But here's where things get really interesting. Once you understand how to create memorable, individual settlements, you can start connecting them in ways that create emergent storytelling opportunities. Each town becomes a note in a larger symphony, contributing to themes and conflicts that span your entire campaign world. That's exactly what we're going to explore in the next part of this series. The connections between your settlements are where the real magic happens. Most game masters treat each town like an isolated bubble, but memorable worlds are built on relationships. The fishing village that depends on the mountain town for metal tools, the farming community that's been feuding with the neighboring settlement over water rights for 3 generations, the trading post that serves as neutral ground between two cultures that can't stand each other. These connections create natural story opportunities that your players will stumble into organically. They don't need to be told that the blacksmith in Millhaven gets his iron from the mines in Stonevale. They'll figure it out when they notice the quality of the metalwork, or when they overhear conversations about delayed shipments, or when they meet the same merchant in both towns. But here's the crucial part. These connections need to feel natural, not forced. They should arise from the practical realities of how people actually live and trade and interact. The mountain town needs food from the valley. The coastal settlement needs wood from the forest. The desert oasis needs everything from everywhere else. Start by mapping out what each settlement produces, what it needs, and how it gets those needs met. This isn't just about trade goods, it's about information, services, culture, and people. The healer who travels between 3 villages, the bard who knows all the local gossip, the merchant family that's been facilitating deals between rival towns for decades. Once you understand these practical connections, you can start layering in the emotional ones, historical alliances and betrayals, cultural exchanges and conflicts, shared celebrations and competing traditions. These are the elements that transform a collection of settlements into a living, breathing region. Think about how news travels between your towns, who carries information, and why, what gets exaggerated or distorted as it passes from place to place. What secrets do some settlements keep from others? These communication networks create opportunities for misunderstandings, rumors, and plot developments that feel organic rather than contrived. The key is to remember that people are fundamentally social creatures. Even in isolated communities, There are always connections to the outside world, family members who moved away, traders who bring news from distant lands, refugees who carry stories of troubles elsewhere. These connections are story hooks waiting to be discovered, but connections alone aren't enough to make your settlements truly memorable. You need to understand the rhythm of life in each place. Every community has its own heartbeat, its own sense of time and priority and urgency. In the farming village, life revolves around the seasons and the weather. Everyone knows when it's time to plant, when to harvest, when to prepare for winter. The rhythm is predictable but fragile, always at the mercy of forces beyond human control. In the trading post, life moves to the rhythm of caravans and market days, periods of frantic activity followed by quiet lulls, the constant flow of strangers bringing news and goods and problems from distant places. In the mining town, life follows the rhythm of shifts and quotas and the dangerous work that happens deep underground. The community is tight knit because everyone depends on everyone else for survival. These rhythms affect everything about how your settlements feel and function. They determine when people are awake and asleep, when they're busy and relaxed, when they're welcoming to strangers, and when they're suspicious. Understanding these rhythms helps you present each settlement at the right moment for maximum impact. If your players arrive at the farming village during harvest time, they'll encounter a community that's exhausted but hopeful, focused on bringing in the crops before the weather turns. If they arrive during the long winter months, they'll find people who are restless and gossipy, eager for news from the outside world. Timing matters because it affects how people behave and what they care about. The same settlement can feel completely different depending on when your players encounter it. This gives you multiple ways to present the same location, keeping it fresh even if your players return multiple times. But here's something most game masters miss: the power of absence. Sometimes the most memorable thing about a settlement is what's not there. The tavern that's always empty. The house where no one ever lights a lamp. The shop that's technically open but never seems to have customers. These absences create curiosity and tension. They make players ask questions and look closer. They suggest stories without telling them outright. The empty tavern might be haunted, or cursed, or simply owned by someone who's too proud to admit they're failing. The dark house might hide a secret, or shelter someone who needs to remain unseen, or simply belong to someone who works nights and sleeps during the day. The beauty of using absence as a storytelling tool is that it engages your players' imagination. They start creating explanations for what they observe. Sometimes their theories are more interesting than anything you had planned. When that happens, consider adopting their ideas or building on them. This brings us to another crucial element of memorable settlements: the power of mystery. Every town should have at least one thing that doesn't quite make sense, one question that can't be answered with a casual conversation or a simple investigation. Maybe it's the statue in the town square that no one can remember being built. Maybe it's the fact that no one in town can agree on how old the settlement actually is. Maybe it's the tradition that everyone follows, but no one can explain the origin of. These mysteries don't need to be solved immediately, or even at all. They're not necessarily plot hooks, though they can become ones. They're atmosphere builders. They make your settlements feel deeper and more complex than they actually are. The best mysteries are the ones that feel like they have answers, even if you haven't figured out what those answers are yet. They should feel like natural parts of the world, not like puzzles you've artificially inserted for your players to solve. When your players encounter these mysteries, don't rush to provide explanations. Let them wonder, let them speculate, let them come up with theories. The mystery is often more interesting than the solution, especially if you give your players space to engage with it on their own terms. This patience with mystery is part of a larger principle. Trust your players to find what's interesting. You don't need to point out every detail or explain every connection. In fact, doing so often ruins the experience. The best discoveries are the ones your players make themselves. Create your settlements with enough depth that there's always something more to discover, but resist the urge to force those discoveries. Let your players explore at their own pace and focus on the things that genuinely capture their interest. Sometimes this means abandoning perfectly good material because your players are more interested in something else. That's not a failure of preparation. It's a sign that your world is rich enough to support multiple directions of exploration. The goal isn't to use every detail you create. The goal is to create enough details that you can respond naturally to whatever your players find compelling. When you achieve that balance, your settlements stop feeling like stage sets and start feeling like real places with real depth. But there's one more element that transforms good settlements into unforgettable ones, and it's something that can't be planned or scripted. That element is the capacity for change. The most memorable settlements aren't frozen in time like museum exhibits. They're living places that grow and evolve in response to what happens in your campaign. They remember your players' actions and react accordingly. When your players save the village from bandits, that changes the settlement, not just in terms of gratitude, but in terms of confidence, prosperity, and how the community sees itself. When they accidentally burn down the market square that leaves scars that reshape the entire town's character, when they introduce new ideas or technologies, those ripple outward in ways that surprise everyone. This responsiveness is what transforms your settlements from backdrops into characters. Real characters change based on their experiences. They learn from their mistakes, celebrate their victories, and carry their wounds. Your settlements should do the same. The baker who was struggling with debt becomes prosperous after your players clear the trade routes. The suspicious guard captain becomes an ally after they help solve a mystery that's been haunting the town. The corrupt merchant finds religion after witnessing something that shakes their worldview. These changes don't happen overnight, and they shouldn't be dramatic unless the circumstances warrant it. But they should be noticeable to players who pay attention. The settlement that welcomed them as strangers greets them as friends on their return. The town that was divided by conflict shows signs of healing. The community that seemed hopeless begins to show sparks of renewed purpose. This evolution serves a deeper purpose than just rewarding player actions. It makes your world feel alive and reactive. It shows that choices matter and that the story continues even when the players aren't present. It creates investment because players can see the tangible results of their involvement. But here's the secret that ties all of these elements together. The best settlements are the ones that feel like they could exist without your players ever visiting them. They have their own internal logic, their own problems and solutions, their own stories unfolding independent of whatever grand adventure your campaign is focused on. When you achieve that level of authenticity, something magical happens. Your players stop treating settlements like video game towns where NPCs exist solely to provide services. They start treating them like real places, full of real people with real lives worth caring about. That's when your game transforms from a series of encounters connected by travel into a living world where every location matters, every interaction has weight, and every return visit feels like coming home to a place that's grown and changed in your absence. The techniques I've shared aren't just about creating better settlements, they're about creating better stories, deeper investment, and more meaningful connections between your players and your world. When you master these principles, you'll find that your players start asking to visit places again, not because they need something from the shops, but because they genuinely care about what's happening there. That's the power of making every town unique. It's not about having the most creative architecture or the most unusual customs. It's about understanding that places, like people, become memorable when they feel real, when they have depth, and when they're capable of growth and change. Start with your very next settlement. Give it a soul, attention, and a rhythm. Make it feel lived in and connected to the world around it. Add a mystery that invites curiosity and the capacity to evolve based on what your players do. Watch how your players respond differently when they encounter a place that feels truly alive. Remember, every dot on your map is an opportunity to create something unforgettable. Don't waste that chance on another generic tavern in another forgettable town. Your players deserve better, your world deserves better, and honestly, you deserve the satisfaction of watching your carefully crafted settlements become beloved parts of your campaign's legacy. Make every town unique and watch your entire world come alive.